We are live. Oh, we should be live now. It says you're
Yeah.
live. So there you go. I was saying, we'll let you know once you're live. We should be live now. I am joined by two near and dear brothers of mine, Subdeacon Daniel Kakish, and my dear brother, incredible scholar, brilliant mind, my dear brother, Dr. Goff. We're going to be talking about Chalcedon and papal primacy, papal supremacy. What does it mean? How on earth can we all be in agreement on that particular issue taught there? But we're going to find out how today. Hopefully a lot of people are tuning in. And before we even begin diving in, I want to ask my brothers, how are you all? Dr. Goff, how are you doing, brother? How have you been?
I've been great. I can't complain. Only one volume left of the Fellner. 7 volumes are out, so that's a long project. And
Wow.
tomorrow, Father Wayne Hellman, conventual Franciscan, is flying into Oregon, and we're going to finish up the introductory materials for a translation we've been working on together since, 2012. On Bonaventure's treatise on the theological virtues. So that should be published with Franciscan Institute Press sometime around the January or February of next year. So definitely happy to have those, but now I got to figure out what to do next.
And I'm sure you will find something. You are always incredibly active. That is great. Now, my brother, Subdeacon, brother, how have you been? What have you been up to? And just anything you want to tell the audience, brother.
Thank you, William. Thank you for having me on. So I'm wrapping up actually my thesis at Agora University in theology. Is my second master's.
Wow.
It's on early Syriac Christology before the schisms on both sides of the border. So that's exciting. When that comes out, hopefully it gets published or something, and then it'll be helpful, at least for us and the Church of the East.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And without a doubt, before and when that comes out and after, gotta have to bring you back, because that is a very important topic. Indeed, that really is an area where all of us need to learn more, and that is Christology. All of us need to learn more about Christology. And I say that because I know a lot of people in the pews really don't know enough about Christology. But with that being said, how incredibly relevant that we mentioned Christology and Chalcedon. But today we'll probably briefly talk about that, and we're going to be talking about the papacy, Chalcedon and the papacy. We know very well by the time we get to Chalcedon, we are no longer united with our dear brothers, the Oriental Orthodox. So you all, let me be clear, you all do not view Chalcedon as an ecumenical council. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. Now, but you've read the documents of Chalcedon. You've read them. We've done multiple shows in the issue. So you've read the documents of Chalcedon. I've read them. In fact, I've done shows and debates on them, bringing them up. So the question to me would be, when you look at Chalcedon, I think it's very clear that what you extrapolate from Chalcedon and the post-Chalcedonian church before the East went their other ways, as we say nicely, you very clearly get papal, I would argue, papal supremacy. It clearly comes out in Chalcedon and other ecumenical councils where East and West are united. Maybe you can share a little bit of your thoughts on that. What are your thoughts from an Oriental Orthodox perspective when it comes to Chalcedon?
Yeah, no doubt, William. You hit the nail on the head. So when I think it was Eric, our good friend Eric Ibarra, who said to find the Chalcedonian formula before Leo, before his tome, is very difficult to find it. And so in order to accept that, then you are accepting the papacy. And the tome was not negotiable. Right. They didn't bring the tome to Chalcedon to say, hey guys, can we agree on this? Can we figure this out? No, this is the tome. If you don't want to accept it, we're going to leave. Leo did not hesitate to excommunicate the entire East for not accepting the tome.
Yeah.
So I don't, and this is just a little bit. I'm talking very little thing. There's the Synod of Rome in 449, leading up to Chalcedon. Leo and Rome's position, those 2 years between 449 and 451, and then kind of solidifying it at 451, and everything that happens after, the context afterwards, like the Henoticon and the Acacian Schism. Like, I don't see how anyone who accepts the Council of Chalcedon can get away from the papacy. It makes no sense. And as you know, William, the Libellus of Hormisdas.
Yep.
Even the Chalcedonians who died outside of communion with Rome, the Chalcedonians still had to remove their people from the diptychs, just because they died outside of communion with Rome, not because they were not Chalcedonians.
Can I interrupt briefly? Because I know
I think we lost William.
Are you able to hear me there?
We can hear you now. Talk.
Okay, you hear me now. I think I might have lost for a moment there. Okay, there we go. I'm back. Okay, good. One thing that has gotten brought up a lot, and I'm interrupting briefly because in the comments down below, I've cataloged over and over. People will say, what do you guys mean by diptychs? What do we mean by that, Subdeacon? Can you maybe tell the people briefly what that means?
Sure. You guys know in the liturgy where I think we all do it. So we have
we do.
In our diptychs, we have the name of our primate, like the patriarch or the pope, and then the patriarchs who he's in communion with. Those are the ones who are alive. And then we have a diptych for the saints in heaven who we're in communion with too. So right after in the prayer. So then in this period of time, Rome told the Eastern Chalcedonians, you need to remove from that prayer all the people you included who died outside of communion with Rome, even if they were Chalcedonian. And they did it. So right now, the Eastern Chalcedonians that exist who are not in communion with Rome, on what do they stand?
Yeah, no doubt. It's a great point there. Now, brother, Dr. Goff, what are your thoughts thus far when we talk about Chalcedon? Now, Dr. Goff is a brilliant Catholic theologian, so I know you agree with Chalcedon. You agree with it, as I do as well. What are your thoughts when you look at Chalcedon and you look at what Chalcedon has to say about the papacy, and in general, what Pope St. Leo the Great thought of his papal office, his role as the Vicar of Christ?
Well, clearly, while there may be objections from Byzantine Orthodox with respect to the location and timing of the council, clearly the Emperor Marcion and his consort Pulcheria, they clearly wanted Roman intervention. They were both, in a sense, disposed towards a kind of Latinate theological language and mentality. And I think with respect to Leo and the office of the papacy, it's clear that Leo understood his position. If you look at, say, letter 14 or letter 104, clearly he understood the unique role, at least in his own mind, that in his mind as well was long-standing and preceding the council, both with respect to the locus of unity and authority, with respect to the definition of dogma, but also with respect, I think importantly, to the renunciation of the Council of Ephesus 449. He took it upon himself to excommunicate Eutychus and rehabilitate Flavian, Pope posthumously. And so I think clearly there was a self-understanding on the part of Leo that he had a unique and special role at Chalcedon. And I don't think his concession to hold the council where and when he didn't prefer takes away from the role he played, especially given the minority status. I think what were there only 16 legates from the Latin West, but nevertheless, the tome took center stage and was also, I mean, Leo expected the tome to be read at Ephesus 449 as well. So clearly there's a self-understanding, and in the actual events of the definition, it's Leo's definition that became Chalcedonian orthodoxy, and that was carried forward. I mean, you have 2 to 3 centuries after the fact, the so-called Neo-Chalcedonian period, trying to work out how do we reconcile Cyril with Leo. And clearly in Chalcedon and post-Chalcedon, the assumption was that Leo and Cyril are in agreement. Now, I'm very much interested in the content of the theological debate, because in my opinion, there didn't need to be a schism, because I think terms were clearly being used differently. And I think it may have been more beneficial, given the fact that the Oriental Orthodox Church of the East at that time, the Egyptians, were using a terminology that, in my opinion, from a Chalcedonian perspective, was more primitive, but it was also basic. It was canonical because of the canonicity that Cyril had gained through the First Council of Ephesus, as well as through Chalcedon. So, content-wise, I don't think there needs to be an essential difference if the terms are understood correctly. And from a Chalcedonian perspective, I think what happened with Leo was there was an application of the same kind of distinction between hypostasis and ousia, or person and essence, that the Cappadocians worked out in Trinitarian theology, that then became applied consistently to Christology. Whereas I think in the language of Cyril, he didn't move through that same kind of Chalcedonian development. So he maintained the language of phusis. But I think objectively, phusis is referring to the supposit, or the person in this function, not to the nature in what later became Leonine Chalcedonian language. So I think it's an unfortunate thing, because I don't think there can be that much disagreement in substance. I think it was a disagreement over canonical terms. But clearly, to accept Chalcedon, I think, is to accept in some way the juridical but also dogmatic authority of the papacy. I think that's a difficult thing to get around, especially when you look at subsequent history with the relevant schisms and also the letter of Pope Hormisdas. So I'm in complete agreement with that thesis. And now, the issue is working out details. And I think that the difference we will come to is the manner in which the Byzantine or future Byzantine Orthodox, the Byzantine aspect of the empire, whether they, since accepting Chalcedon, they implicitly accepted the authority of the Pope. And then the other question is that the Cyrillians claim that they never accepted that. Thus, they are perfectly logical in rejecting Chalcedon. But nevertheless, Chalcedon itself indicates, by its acceptance, there is a unique role of the papacy that begs an account.
Yeah. Great point there. Now, you mentioned maybe if Subdeacon, maybe you can touch a little bit upon the comments in Ephesus 449,
Yes,
which I believe you would call Ephesus 2, right? Okay, if you could maybe touch upon that a little bit, and I'll listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, Doctor, thank you for mentioning that, because it's so important. Ephesus 2, as far as the empire was concerned, as far as the Emperor Theodosius was concerned, same emperor as Ephesus 1, by the way, and the law of the land, it was ecumenical in the mind of everybody. It was called legitimately. Legates were there. That means they recognized there is a council that we have to go to. Leo had sent them to go. They were representatives of all the sees. So, and Leo, because the tome was not read. See, what is the tome? The tome is the judgment of Eutyches. That's Leo's judgment on the matter that happened in 448. Now, 449 is considered to be the trial of Eutyches, the council, Ephesus 2. So it was not read, and it wasn't condemned. The tome was not condemned there. So it wasn't read. Why? Because they're thinking, why would we read the tome, the judgment, before the trial? This is what the trial is for. And as far as the council was concerned and the encouragement of the emperor, the emperor wanted to restore Eutyches. They gave Eutyches a confession of faith to read. That was orthodox. He read it, tricked everybody, right? So he read it, and they were like, well, he said an orthodox confession of faith. We find him not guilty. The tome in their minds seemed to be outdated. So there was no point of upholding the judgment. But Leo single-handedly viewed himself to have the power to overthrow an entire ecumenical council. In their minds, it was an ecumenical council. Just by himself, Leo thought he could do that. And then he called it a robber synod. So today, the Eastern Orthodox, the Byzantines, why, on what grounds, and I ask them this all the time, on what grounds do you reject Ephesus 2? On what grounds do you call it a robber synod? Because Leo did. That's it. That's the authority that they recognize that has the power to reject an entire ecumenical council, is the Pope. It's a great point.
And that is that to me is a very powerful point that I think at times does get forgotten. But you brought that up masterfully, Dr. Goff. And in your estimation, how would one respond to that? Because I have asked numerous, and really I've never really gotten a clear answer or the same answer from everyone. I've never gotten an answer that satisfies my hunger for a deep theological discussion on this issue, because I look at Chalcedon, and in a moment we'll read a little bit of what the apps actually have to say. And to me, it really does show that Pope St. Leo the Great viewed himself as having this particular authority. And as Subdeacon mentioned, if you're going to reject that council on the basis of what, and if you look at the historical record, how was it rejected by the Chalcedonians? And I think it's very clear that this really does point to what modern day Catholics have to say about the role of the Vicar of Christ, of the successor of St. Peter, and by and large, what modern day our Eastern friends, by and large, reject a kind of authority that they reject that the Pope has today. Perhaps your thoughts on that, Dr. Goff?
Well, yeah, I think a couple things need to be distinguished, because I think there is a way for the Byzantine Orthodox to give an account, but that presupposes certain conditions that de facto are similar to what now the Oriental Orthodox would affirm. And I think the first distinction is to be made is, even though the Council of 449 was a council convened over dogmatic issues, there was also something embedded that needs to also be taken into account. And this is the question of ecclesiastical action, jurisdiction, and authority, especially with respect to the condemnation and excommunications and depositions of individual persons. And so from the dogmatic issue, if the dogmatic issue is taking priority, and there isn't already a common assumption, and now this is a debatable issue, that the Pope had the authority to both excommunicate, rehabilitate, but also to provide the final determination on a dogmatic issue. Yeah. If that's not being understood, then I think the dogmatic issue and the kind of the necessity for due process of carrying out the trial makes sense. But clearly, Leo had a different idea, because he was dealing not just with a dogmatic issue, but with a juridical issue, an issue of an ecclesiastical union that pertained to dogmatic positions being held. And so I think Leo was a bit piqued at the same time about the deposition of Flavian. And so he's looking at it from a juridical issue. He's presupposing that he has the authority because really all the churches kind of flow to Rome and find their center of unity in his vision. So he's saying, this was done out of order. I should have been consulted. I have the final word on it. And that was his assumption. And clearly that was the same assumption carried into the Council of Chalcedon. And I think the Eastern Orthodox reply to that assumption is similar to the Oriental Orthodox insofar as, well, that was never presupposed. And so they could make a case, given the fact that the council was convened by the Emperor Marcion, and it was opened kind of against or sideways to the wishes of Leo, that they could say, well, you see, the administrative or juridical or jurisdictional aspects, that was never at issue. It was the dogmatic issue. And so the dogmatic issue is fine. And there happens to be an agreement here between the Byzantine Orthodox or the Orthodox aspect of the Chalcedonian Church, as well as the Latin aspect. So the fact that Leo happened to be right, well, this justifies our following. But in point of fact, you either never had a meeting of the minds at that council, or there is an implicit acceptance of the authority of Leo to determine the outcome as well as the rehabilitation of Flavian.
Right.
And the point that Subdeacon Daniel made about the revocation of Ephesus 449, because it seemed to, in a similar way as Lateran 649, it seems to be an ecumenical council until it's not. Either it's not ratified as such explicitly, or it's just simply revoked. And that's the amazing thing. Now, there could be an argument that it was in conjunction with the emperor and the current Archbishop of Constantinople, as well as Pope Leo. But clearly Pope Leo, in his own understanding, is, and in effect, the driving force of both the revocation of 449, as well as the formulation and rehabilitation of all those figures in Chalcedon, and also the synthesis that he provided, or at least the attempt, for sake of argument, of the synthesis that he provided between his own formulation and that of Cyril's. And so, again, you're stuck back at the same issue. You might be able to make a plausible historical case, but I think in terms of the order of priority with respect to jurisdiction, as well as the outcome and events of the council and the dogmatic formulation, it's really difficult to avoid Leo, because Leo his teaching is ascribed to Peter the Apostle. And so that's very difficult to get around that.
Yeah, very, very, very good point there. Subdeacon, your thoughts?
Yeah, if I could just piggyback off of that and to prove more for what Dr. Goff is saying. Chalcedon, when Theodoret walks in, Dioscoros goes, "What is he doing here?" And like, he's deposed. He's not. He is not allowed to be here, you know. And then they answer Dioscoros. They say he's restored on the authority of Leo. So Leo single-handedly reversed a council by exonerating a person who was deposed there. And then Dioscoros answers them. He says, by what canon can Leo do this? And they don't answer him. And Theodoret sits with the canonical bishops. So it's I mean, obviously, I think it's impossible for somebody to have consistent logic and follow this situation without seeing the authority of the Pope of Rome and submission to him in all of this. And obviously, throughout the rest of history with, as you guys know, Pope
Agatho. No, great point, sir. I think that very often we don't delve into the discussion of the restoration of Theodoret, but that really, really is important, because there's a clear view there from Pope Leo that he believed that he had this power. That is pretty significant there. Another significant thing is that the Greek Chalcedonian Episcopate embraced the papacy. There's no way around that. There really, truly is no way around that. And that's an interesting discussion, that the Greek Episcopate, in my opinion, clearly did embrace the papacy. Now, I know there's answers to that by our modern day Eastern Orthodox friends, but I think the historical record is very clear. Clearly, when it comes to the issue of Theodoret, that is a point where clearly the Oriental Orthodox today, you would not refer to Theodoret as Blessed Theodoret, would you?
No.
No. You know, another point is that, you know, you bring in the rehabilitation basically on the authority of Leo at the council. But during the course of the council, not only was Theodoret rehabilitated, the tables were completely turned against Dioscoros.
Yep.
And he ended up leaving the council. And this seems to be of a process with respect going back to, again, the judgment about Ephesus 449, the deposition of Flavian, and the ratification of Eutychus. And so there's a clear process, because Eutychus and Dioscorus were in the same kind of patrimony, and Theodoret is being condemned at 449, yet being rehabilitated, giving his status at Chalcedon 441, 451. Well, at the same time, during the course of that same council, the tables are completely reversed with Dioscorus, and he ends up being essentially condemned and leaving the council without really undergoing a full trial. Basically the tables were turned, he was abandoned by some, and he ended up just leaving. If I'm remembering correctly. So, they're clearly related again to this judgment of Ephesus 449, and then the place and role of the papacy or his legates at Chalcedon 451.
And I want to add too, so if we just fast forward a little bit, people like to think of Constantinople 553 as the first synod where the Pope was present, right? But actually it was 536 Constantinople, and that was viewed actually as the first fifth ecumenical council until it wasn't. And I think it's one of those Lateran type of councils where you can't really reject it if you're a Chalcedonian, but it's not on the official list of whatever. So at this council, William and Doctor, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with it, but it was a reconciliation attempt by Justinian to reconcile the two sides.
And this was Severus involved at this point?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Severus was there. Anthimus of Constantinople, he was a non-Chalcedonian, and Anthimus was going to be this reconciliation council where Justinian brings Anthimus in, and even Constantinople rejects Chalcedon and whatever. Little do they know who's in town. Pope Agapetus is there of Rome. He's in Constantinople, and they had no idea. So when the Pope is there, who's presiding over the council? The Pope is, right?
Yeah.
So he deposes Agapetus. He deposes Anthimus, and then he puts Minas of Constantinople instead. And then there's a rule now. And by the way, this is where Severus gets first condemned, and then his writings have to be burned, etc. So after Minas becomes Patriarch of Constantinople, which is what Pope Agapetus does, the rule is every time after that, the Patriarch of Constantinople has to get approval from the Pope of Rome first, because of what happened with Anthimus. This is kind of the dominoes now of Chalcedon, and then you guys being the Eastern Chalcedonians keep doing this weird stuff like the Acacian Schism and then 536 and whatever. So Rome has to kind of keep them in check after that.
Yeah, those are very, very good points. Earlier, Dr. Goff made a brilliant comment, and I want to briefly read from the Acts of the Council. After the reading of the foregoing epistle, the most reverend bishops cried out, "This is the faith of the fathers. This is the faith of the apostles. So we all believe. Does the Orthodox believe? Anathema to him who does not thus believe. Peter has spoken thus through Leo. So taught the apostles piously and truly. Did Leo teach? So taught Cyril. Everlasting be the memory of Cyril. Leo and Cyril taught the same thing. Anathema to him who does not believe, does not so believe. This is the true faith." Now, earlier, Dr. Goff, you made a great, brilliant comment that Pope Leo the Great indeed believed he had the particular power he had, that it was given to him. It was divinely instituted, and it came directly, of course, from our Lord, the office instituted by our Lord. And I think that is a point that very, very often tends to get forgotten. But Pope St. Leo the Great, look, he as a Chalcedonian, as a Catholic, we joke a lot, and Subdeacon knows this. We joke a lot that, Pope Leo just wanted his tome to be read. He wanted the letter to be read. But really, we don't hear enough of the importance of how the tome of Leo truly was the mark of orthodoxy at Chalcedon. And going forward, you've got the very beating heart of Christology there that we believe, of course, could be a discussion for another day, but we believe is directly in line with a Cyrillian Christology. So that the very fact that Pope St. Leo the Great believed he had this power and this authority, I think it needs to get brought to the table in any discussion on Chalcedon. Perhaps your thoughts on that, Dr. Goff?
Well, I think that's correct. And I would just briefly add that in distinction, both with the kind of presupposed understanding that Leo brought to this entire discussion, especially again with the emphasis on the jurisdiction or juridical powers with respect to establishing not only dogma, but in a sense the visible communion or union of the churches. That seems clearly different. And it comes out, I think it's in Canon 28, wherein there is a certain concession made to Constantinople. Right. But the understanding of the nature of that primacy or priority or dignity of the see is something, at least in the mind of Leo, that was essentially different, and also seemingly ratified, if not ringingly explicitly, strongly implicitly, in the recognition and identification that the faith of the apostles, the faith of Peter, is being brought to bear on the situation, both retrospectively looking back to Ephesus 40:49, but also Chalcedon 4:51 with the very formulation, rehabilitation, and excommunication of figures, that the jurisdiction was something of divine institution, which is essentially different than the other more historically based and politically based rationale for the other sees. And I think, at least from a Catholic perspective, presuming that Leo basically got it right, this implies a very different understanding of the nature of episcopal, ecclesial authority and unity that uniquely resides in the person of the Pope, as distinct from all the other patriarchs and patriarchates. So I think you're right. I think even the fact that there's a concession and a recognition in Leo's mind at Chalcedon implies that there already was presupposed a difference, and that difference, in fact, was exercised in the council itself.
Yeah, I think that you are bringing up, and it is preserved in Epistle 98. Let me go ahead and put it up there on the screen. And that's a great point that you bring up in that Epistle 98, where, and I'll briefly read it and we can talk about that. In Epistle 98, you have, there's a letter that is addressed to the Pope. And it begins, well, it doesn't begin that way. I'm going to cut through a lot of what it says. But part of what it said is, "For we are persuaded that with your usual care for others, you have often extended that apostolic prestige which belongs to you, to the church in Constantinople also. Accordingly, vouchsafe, most holy and blessed Father, to accept as your own wish, and as conducting to good government, the things which we have resolved on for the removal of all confusion and the confirmation of church order. For your holiness delegates the most pious bishops, Pescesinus and Lucentius, and with them the right godly presbyter Boniface, attempted vehemently to resist these decisions." And we continue onward. This is very, very important to read this, because this is Epistle 98. It goes onward to say, "For we duly regarding our most devout and Christ-loving emperors, who delight therein, and the illustrious Senate, and so to say the whole imperial city, consider it opportune to use the meeting of the children rebounds to the parents' glory. Accordingly, we entreat you, honor our decision." So they're asking him, honor our decision by your assent. "And as if we have yielded to the head of our agreement on things honorable, so may the head of our proceedings to strengthen our position and to ratify and establish what we have done." So to kind of break down what is happening here, the council is asking the Pope to approve what Dr. Goff and Subdeacon have pointed out is Canon 28. Now, what does Canon 28 do? It would give Constantinople, in my opinion, what would have been unprecedented standing. And you have that preserved in Epistle 98. Now, as you know very well, to me, this is very powerful, because it shows that the fathers that you have there at Chalcedon didn't look at the Pope and view the Pope merely as just one bishop among many others, or as a subordinate. Rather, they viewed him as having that power and that special role. And as we know, in a moment, we'll look at Pope St. Leo the Great's response to them. But Canon 28, in my opinion, some people think that that's a knock on the papacy. I have no clue how or why they would think that. I think rather the opposite. It surely does show that the Pope was not on equal footing with all the rest of the other bishops or subordinate. Perhaps your thoughts on that, Subdeacon, and then I'll go to you, Dr. Goff.
I don't think Leo's having any of it. I don't.
No.
It doesn't. If he can overthrow a whole council, he can't overthrow a canon.
Right.
He didn't care about the canon. But I want to also point out that Leo, as far as he was concerned, his tome, that's it. Like from 2 years earlier, his tome is the judgment. There's in his mind, there was no really need for Chalcedon. That was Marcion's idea. Leo just said the tome is universally binding. There's no question. So this is ex cathedra. This is what it is. For Leo. When the Eastern Chalcedonians say sometimes, no, it was a conciliar decision, but Leo was talking about it 2 years earlier that the whole world needs to accept it by himself, so unilaterally. I don't see that at all. There's a scholar. His name is Every. He wrote an article in Eastern Church's Review called "The Monophysite Question," and he deals with the topic of why the tome was not read at Ephesus 2, and he emphasizes that it was not condemned either. They had the setting to condemn it, as far as they were concerned, right? They were a council, and the bishops were there, and they could have done that, but they didn't. And he says, besides the reason that I already gave, which is that it was a judgment of a person before the trial had occurred. Another reason was they didn't want to judge Rome. They didn't want to have the potential to be there to condemn Rome. They wanted to protect Rome from that, as far as they were concerned, again. And also we see this. There's a letter in 497. This was during the Acacian Schism. In 497, from the Synod of Alexandria, which is at the time representing the whole East. I can't remember who the emperor was at the time, if it was Zeno or Anastasius, one of them, who has Alexandria write this letter to Rome. At the time, they were in schism, right? The letter it's a very beautiful letter. It's a very loving letter. It wasn't one of animosity or enmity between the two. And they're telling them, we want to talk to you guys about the tome because maybe there was a misunderstanding. It could have been that the Greek that we received of the tome is a mistranslation of what you said in Latin. So let's talk about it and see if there's something. Unfortunately, we don't have the reply of this, but the tome was non-negotiable. Nothing was edited. Nothing was subtracted or added to it from the beginning, and all the successors of Leo continued in this mindset. It wasn't. I don't see how anybody can look at the situation and say that was a council thing, because it clearly wasn't.
Your thoughts, Dr. Goff?
Well, I think, going back to Canon 28, it seems to indicate there's a certain presupposition or presumption of the unique place and role, especially, again, in terms of jurisdictional or juridical authority of the papacy, because it seems, even in the language of the canon, that there's an assumption that whatever Leo possesses of apostolicity and apostolic authority, this is something that is extended, and it's being requested or being appreciated or given thanks for. And there's also, again, a request for consent. Yeah. And so it seems to me strange that giving thanks or expressing gratitude for this apostolic blessings that come from Leo, That seems to presuppose there is something that is coming from Leo. And at the same time, why would one even bring this up? Now, I think a Byzantine Orthodox might say, well, this is just kind of pro forma Byzantine style. You're going to use exaggeration. But nevertheless,
I've heard that.
It is a request for the consent of the Pope. Yep. And I think, I'm skipping ahead a bit with respect to the debate over the tome, because I think it's important to bring up Leo's second letter, the second famous letter in 458.
Tends to get forgotten.
I think here he is making a linguistic change, and you see hints of it in the first tome, because in the Latin, natura and forma are used, but the emphasis is on nature. And this is translated into the Greek as physis, right? And so this is the big problem with the theological line of St. Cyril, is that there's clearly, to me, a different meaning being invested in the term physis or nature. But Leo also speaks of and uses the word form, which has a sort of different connotation, because here you're moving into not conceiving of something as a distinct entity that could sound Nestorian, like a nature standing alone in itself, but rather the energy or activity that is invested in the given humanity or divinity. And the form or power or energy of the divinity and the humanity are both ascribed to the person of Christ as one person. But what's interesting is that in the second letter, in the Latin of Leo, he uses almost exclusively the word form or forma as opposed to natura. And it seemingly maybe is indicating that Leo is understanding, at least at some point or at some level, the problem or the nature of the confusion between the so-called, in his mind, Monophysites and the Nestorian. And he's using different language that doesn't go directly counter to the canonical language of Cyril, because he understands that the dispute is, in his mind, over the terms being used and the theological meaning invested into those terms between the Chalcedonians and the Cyrillians. And he's using a different term that may be more amenable to making the same point, that there is true and full humanity, there is true and full divinity with all the power energy that both of those realities possess, nevertheless, in one person. And so I think even Leo understood that there was a problem. And I find it interesting. I haven't done much research chasing down or tracking why Leo would have changed the language from the first tome to the second letter of 458. But it seems in Leo's mind that he's making the same point with now using the word forma rather than natura. And that does seem to mitigate, in his mind at least, the harsh contrariety between the use of physis between the Cyrillians and the Chalcedonians at Chalcedon. This is more of a historical point, but it seems to indicate at least that the problem was perceived. And then there was a way to try to bring together the two approaches. And of course, this is carried out in the subsequent 6th century through about 8th century discussions between the Severians and the Chalcedonians, and great figures like Leontius and other people.
Yeah. Were you aware of the shift in language, Subdeacon? Have you done any research on that particular?
So for what I know, here's the issue. So the letters of St. Cyril that are published by Catholic University of America, I think that the translator is a Catholic. And he has footnotes affirming what Dr. Goff is saying. The issue we would have with that is we can't say that by physis Cyril meant person. Why? Because he says before the union, Cyril says in his commentary on Hebrews, he says before the union, the natures were divided. And then after, I'll read the quote. Though the natures were divided before the incarnation, however, the order of the union and incarnation preach us truly one. So natures here being physis. So before the union, there is two physis. And then after there's one incarnate. So we can't say he's from two persons. We can't. So physis can't mean person to Cyril. So this is where we would have an issue with that. Understand?
Your thoughts on that, Dr. Goff?
Yeah, and I think this is probably why Leo and the subsequent Chalcedonians pushed so hard a movement of ek to in, because to a Chalcedonian, ironically, Cyril's language of before the union and subsequent to the union distinction and unity would imply that there was a kind of pre-existence of the humanity in some manner or mode before the union. And for a Chalcedonian, it would rather be asserted that although you can make a case that there's a structural priority or condition, there has to be a human nature to be assumed. But in the event that human nature comes into existence, meaning generically the humanity of our Lord Jesus Christ, because I don't want to get into natures because that's part of the issue under dispute. So I don't want to use those words. But the humanity existed at the instant, and only in the instant it was assumed by the divinity. For them, the ek seems to indicate a chronological distinction of which, or into which, or out of which, more specifically, this union was achieved. And for the Chalcedonians, they would say, this doesn't make sense because the humanity of Christ only ever existed as assumed by the person of the Logos. And so, I don't think that's what Cyril could have meant, understood in that way. But the language is temporal and even spatial, because you were talking about a mystery here. It's interesting to note that for Cyril, because this has been a point of confusion, is that the what is his famous formula? The
one incarnate
the
nature.
enfleshment of the one incarnate Logos. Is that right? Did I get that right? And with respect to that, it seems like, well, one incarnate nature, right, of God the Word. That's more precisely the quote, if I'm remembering.
One nature of the Word incarnate, something like that.
Or in fleshed, en sarcosime, I think, or say sarcos en sarcosime, kosamene. And I think that word of what is being attributed to the nature there is what creates the difficulty in terms of the unity yet distinction between divinity and humanity, because it's difficult to tell from a Chalcedonian perspective that it's difficult to identify what the nature is referring to, because for a Chalcedonian, obviously the nature as existing is always terminating. And you see this in the Damascene, you see this in the subsequent scholastics. The nature is always, as existing, a termination in a hypostasis or as a hypostasis. And so for the Chalcedonian, what is the nature referring to in that instance? Because it's being spoken of as a unity. And it seems like, well, if it's the unity, it's either the unity of the two natures, meaning of the two forms, the humanity and divinity, in a kind of composition, which is what they're accused of, or it seems like it's referring to the prior nature of the Word and of the Logos. Now, the nature would be the divinity, and the Logos would be the hypostasis or the person. And so in that account, it seems like if it's the nature of the Word, well, it's the nature of the Word terminating precisely as Word. And thereby you seem to be getting close to Chalcedon, because you're affirming the priority of the divine person of the Word, who possesses the divine nature, to which the humanity is united by hypostatic union. Perhaps that's all gobbledygook, but no. I'm trying to say the problem linguistically and conceptually for the Chalcedonian who applies the Cappadocian distinction between nature and person in the Trinity to the economy in the incarnation. Whereas it seems like Cyril kind of keeps those together, and it's less clear with the Cappadocian distinctions what he's referring to.
So just to be clear, and I think you guys would know that we believe obviously the humanity did not exist before the incarnation happened, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 No
So
doubt.
yeah. So
No doubt.
even in the liturgy, we show it in that so the censer for us symbolizes the womb of the Virgin Mary, and the coal represents Christ. The charcoal is a lit coal, right, in
Right.
English? Okay. So, but we can't put the coal in the censer and then light it. We're not allowed to do that. We have to put the coal in the censer already lit, because it's symbolizing the Christology of the divinity and the humanity united. He's one from the two. You can't separate them after it's lit. You can't take the fire and the coal. You can't separate it again. So then in that way, he's already in the womb of the Virgin. Not the coal is in, and then we light it in the womb.
That's interesting, because observing Byzantine liturgy, I go to a Ruthenian church, and I don't have certainty. This is not my area of expertise, but my sons have often served. And what I've noticed, and I could be completely mistaken, because again, this is only kind of ad hoc observation and I've never thought about it, and I could have just misperceived what was going on, but it does seem to me that in the Byzantine liturgy, when we're dealing with the censer, if I'm understanding you correctly, the coal is put in and then lit.
Oh, it's the opposite.
Wow.
So it seems the opposite. Now, that could be not standard Byzantine liturgical practice.
Okay.
It could be a Ruthenian thing. I don't know. But it is interesting to observe the different, and I like the typological emphasis and the theological emphasis in your liturgy better now that you've mentioned it, but I've never given it thought before. But I have noticed it. I was like, oh, I could see my son lighting the coal, kneeling down while it's resting in the censer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for what it's worth.
Two other things that we do, whereas there's a point right before the creed and the kiss of peace, right before the anaphora starts. The deacon will be holding the censer, and the priest. The censer has 4 chains going from top to bottom. One of the chains goes all the way to the top, like from the center top to the bottom. The other 3 are on the outside coming down. So the priest will hold the first chain on the outside. He'll say, "Holy is the one Father." And obviously, I'm translating in English.
Mm-hmm.
And then second, he'll take the chain coming from top to bottom, and then the second chain on the outside, and hold them together and say, "Holy is the one Son." But notice he's holding 2 chains, because he's one from the 2.
Yeah.
Right. Then he'll take the other chain on the outside. He said, "Holy is the one Holy Spirit." And then also in the Eucharist, the loaf. So historically, we used to use one big loaf, but now for practical reasons, they've broken it up into. They have like multiple small loaves, but in order to keep the oneness idea, the unity idea, is you can only have an odd number of loaves you're consecrating, unless it's 2. You're allowed to do 2. Why? Because of the 2 natures from which Christ is.
I've got a few people saying that has got to be a Ruthenian thing. Some people are saying, same thing with the censer in Byzantine Catholic. So some people are thinking that's a Ruthenian thing. So it's different then. That is, but either which way, that is very, very interesting.
Well, it could be. It could be. It was just being done incorrectly at my parish too.
Yeah, some churches, even with us, that if there's ignorance in the parish or abuse or whatever, they don't care.
Yeah,
just whatever they
right.
do.
Yeah.
Right. No doubt. Yeah. I want to kind of roll it back to something you all said, by the way, fascinating. One day we got to do a whole show just on Christology. One day we got to bring the brother Elijah, or I know he'll be furious if we don't bring him on board. But fascinating. You both, or maybe it was me. No, I think you both alluded to, we spoke about Canon 28. Then we alluded to Dr. Goffin and Subdeacon. You both alluded to the fact that Pope Leo was having none of it. And you're right about that. And before we end the show, I want to show how you're right. He was having none of it, because he does respond. We have his response in letter 104. where he says, let the city of Constantinople have, as we desire, its high rank, and under the protection of God's right hand, long enjoy your clemency's rule. Then here it gets interesting. Yet things secular stand on a different basis from things divine, and there can be no sure building save on that rock which the Lord has laid for a foundation. He that covets what is not his due loses what is his own. Let it be enough for Anatolius that by the aid of your piety and by my favor and approval, he has obtained the bishopric of so great a city. Let him not disdain a city which is loyal, though he cannot make it an apostolic see, and let him on no account hope that he can rise by doing injury to others. For the privileges of the church is determined by the canons of the Holy Fathers and fixed by the decrees of the Nicene Synod, cannot be overthrown by any unscrupulous act, nor disturbed by any innovation. And I think the one point that you both either directly referred to or alluded to was when he clearly notes, yet things secular stand on a different basis from things divine, and there can be no sure building save on that rock which the Lord has laid for a foundation. He clearly views himself as the vicar of Christ, as the successor of St. Peter, and very clearly was, as Subdeacon and Dr. Goff said, was having none of it. I'd like to get your thoughts on it. Perhaps you first, we'll go a different round this time. Perhaps you first, Dr. Goff, and then you, Subdeacon. What are your thoughts on Pope St. Leo's response?
Well, I guess because I'm a bit of an Anglophile, and I have a kind of genetic disposition to try to see the both sides of the argument and give a plausible case. I think that the major premise is absolutely correct. The things secular are distinct and have a different foundation from things divine. But I think a Byzantine Orthodox in that same letter could appeal to the fact that these were established by the ancient canons and the Council of Nicaea. And so in that letter, it's not fully fleshed out or specified exactly what that distinction is, unless you understand the full range of Leo's thought, or a fuller range of Leo's thought, as well as his very implicit presumptions about himself or presuppositions about himself with respect to Ephesus 449 and Chalcedon 441, because an Orthodox person may just simply say, well, see, it's on the basis of the canons and the Council of Nicaea that he's making this claim, not necessarily on the basis of a unique authority. I don't think that interpretation is consistent with the entirety of his thought, but it perhaps gives a way for the opposite side of the debate to have a plausible basis in discussion for pushing back. And in that case, then it's simply as well, it's similar to the Oriental Orthodox. We never accepted this kind of authority in Rome. We weren't understanding it in this way. And so you're just kind of making things up and imposing without a sufficient basis. And even in the letter, what was that, letter 104? I don't remember.
Little 104,
Okay, yeah. And so even there, you are appealing to canons and councils, not to a unique personal authority. I think that's a way in which a counterclaim could be made that has some plausibility. But I don't think in terms of an abductive case, it's the best or simplest explanation, because it fails the test of parsimony on the one hand, because it's not the simplest explanation, but it also seems to exclude the very blatant fact of the centrality of the role of the papacy and or his legates with respect to, as Subdeacon Daniel brought up, the revocation of a council, the rehabilitation of figures excommunicated, the excommunications of figures who were in charge or major figures at a putative ecumenical council, and the actual outcome of the event, namely the Tome of Leo is church law. And Leo himself consistently attributed this primacy of jurisdiction, which in effect, and I think here's another thing to clear up, and then I will stop talking, is that the understanding of papal authority and even papal infallibility is not a kind of Gnostic oracular gift, as though the Pope has special knowledge. It's rather an understanding that the Pope has practical and immediate jurisdiction in resolving disputes and in determining what is within the bounds of orthodoxy and what is not. It doesn't mean that he is in a position to divine the truth apart from learning, or that he has a special gift of prophecy. It's rather a very practical, almost what you might say, something equivalent to the Supreme Court. You can't appeal beyond it. Only in the mind of Leo and in Catholic ecclesiology, the Pope has a negative gift of not completely destroying the church, either through heresy or the destruction of the sacramental order.
Right.
And so that seems to be pretty basic. So again, it's more of a practical juridical understanding for establishing church unity and intercommunion of sacraments on the condition of Orthodox dogma. But it's not a special prophetic gift. And it seems like Leo is simply exercising a very common yet developed notion that was pretty continuous throughout the Latin West. And I think, as we've shown, it was also operative, at least intermittently and at very important points, in the Byzantine East.
Oh, yeah.
And if it was operative, on what basis was it operative? And then on what basis can you say it's no longer operative? And if you appeal to questions of dogma and dogmatic orthodoxy, well, it seems to simply merely beg the question, because on what basis do you determine orthodoxy, given that you accepted in this very fine-grained and very complex and difficult juridical and dogmatic discussion, you've ceded the role and authority of a kind of absolute jurisdiction of the papacy with respect to council and with respect to dogma. It's like, so when does this will-o'-the-wisp or Cheshire cat, disappear and reappear? On what basis? It seems like it can't be consistently applied at that point.
What a great point there, and I love that comment that you're right there. The Tome of Leo is church law. What a great epic quote there. I'm gonna rob that from you, Dr. Kopp. That's a great quote, and you're right. The power that the Pope has, you're right. It seems to be operative at certain times in history. It's just a very interesting thing that it seems to be operative very often in ecumenical councils. And for the East, they definitely have got to be able to answer for that. That is an epic quote. I'd love to get your thoughts on all of this discussion thus far, Subdeacon.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we can. If we're being honest, we can't get away from this understanding of history that Dr. Goff is saying regarding the acceptance, whether I mean, I don't even think it's implicit. I think it's explicit. And the Father Price, in his Acts of Chalcedon, he says Leo didn't want to have a council. He didn't want to do a new creed, which Chalcedon did. He didn't want any of that. He just wanted the tome, right? And he was, in that sense of him not kind of pushing for, a new creed or whatever, he could be classified as a conservative in that way. And evidence for that is this quote that you showed, William, about Nicaea, about preserving the sees in the order that Nicaea had them. Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, the Petrine sees. Now, with Chalcedon, with Constantinople, Rome was aware of Constantinople's sensitivity to this from Constantinople 381, which at the time, before Chalcedon, nobody recognized as an ecumenical council, right? Ephesus 431 never mentions it. Cyril doesn't seem to care about it. Ephesus 449 doesn't mention it. Constantinople 448 mentions it, but that's because it's the same see of Constantinople. Now, in 449, Constantinople was upset because of where they were seated, right? And so 451, they're complaining about what happened at 449, and they say they seated us in so and so place, and the Roman legates sarcastically are like, "Don't worry, we have you seated number 2. It's okay." So it's actually funny if you read the Acts. Like, it's like a little child, like they get to sit in the front seat kind of thing. And again, I mean, if that, I don't think we could take Chalcedon. I don't think we could take it on its own outside of the historical context. If we're looking at Chalcedon and the history around it, and then what happens after through the Libellus of Hormisdas and the rest, I'm not sure how someone can justify going with that chain of history and that narrative, and accepting this as divinely instituted and inspired without taking the whole thing. It's kind of like another version, like a lesser version. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or dismissive of like Protestantism, where they will take the Bible, but then they won't take the whole tradition from which the
Right.
Bible comes. Similar.
Great points there. Now,
Well,
go
maybe
ahead, Dr. Goff.
If I could just add, because this it may be a bit far afield and sideways from the discussion, but I think these central points of the nature of the foundation of the dignity and primacy of the See of Constantinople is quite important and still bearing consequences in current Eastern Orthodox ecclesiology, because I think it's in many ways admitted that Constantinople was given its place because of the dignity it held as the seat of the empire. So in some sense, there was a more secular political rationale for the relative priority of Constantinople vis-a-vis the other sees of the great patriarchates. Clearly, Rome understood that it's distinct, and in terms of account, it's entirely immune from this discussion, because at least with Leo, you have a clear affirmation that it's of apostolic foundation. That seems to be recognized even in Constantinople as distinct from Constantinople. But it rears its head now in disputes between the issue of primacy in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Byzantine Orthodox Church, and the dispute between Moscow and Rome, because Moscow will just simply say, well, there probably really isn't primacy. And if there is, we should have it, because now we're the see of the most important and most populated Orthodox Church. And Chalcedon's, Constantinople's kind of a backwater. Mm-hmm. And Constantinople understands, well, there needs to be primacy. And this is theological, but nevertheless, their very primacy seems to have been based on political rationale from its outset. And so I think this is a remaining problem. So it seems like you have to either deny primacy or say it's all purely political, and clearly Moscow is first now, or you affirm primacy and understand that there is a certain kind of delegated rank that comes from the See of Rome, or you're just simply outside of that discussion, as perhaps the Oriental Orthodox are, and say we never accepted this notion of primacy at all. Yeah. But it seems again the Byzantine Orthodox have an ecclesiological problem that is deeply theological, that they can't resolve from within their own self-conception, theologically or historically, and that seems to be a big problem.
Yeah, no doubt. So, Deacon, your thoughts?
Yeah. So to this day, in our daily prayers, I don't know what they call it in the Western tradition. The 7 daily prayers facing east, etc. In this
liturgy of the hours, the breviary.
Yes, liturgy of the hours. Yeah.
The oral.
So, right. Yeah. So we have a prayer where to this day we still mention Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch in the prayer. And these are what we believe to be the Petrine sees, instituted by Christ through St. Peter, who he established the see in Antioch, he established the see in Rome, and he sent St. Mark, who he gave orders to establish the see in Alexandria. So via Peter, right? Or via Mark. And these three, these are the original sees, established by Peter in the beginning, when the persecution was still there, not a seat of political power that came later, and they just did it for fun, for no reason, kind of thing. Even to this day, the bishops within Oriental Orthodoxy, they think of the see of Constantinople historically like it's like we just gave them one to make them happy. kind of thing. It's not and because exactly the implications are what Dr. Goff is saying. Like, now that they have the precedent of a man-made sea, well, why not Moscow? Why not anywhere? Like any one of these, and after Moscow, why not New York? Why not some other place? Well, for us, these are unchangeable. Rome, Alexandria, Antioch will always have precedence over everybody. Obviously, if Rome was in communion, and for us, Alexandria and Antioch have these positions. So this is very important to think about. Absolutely.
Now we, as we round off our show, got a few minutes, and I have to go real quickly to do a show. I want to give you all briefly to put a plug for anything you all may be working on, and I want to say I look forward to having you both back on very, very soon and have another discussion. This has been incredible and robust. I look forward to having you both back on very soon. If maybe you all want to put a plug in for what you're working on, where people can find your work. If you want to go first, Dr. Goff, and I'll give you the final word, Subdeacon.
Well, yeah, just look out for the collected essays of Peter Fellner, the translation of the treatise on the theological virtues by Bonaventure. And then I have several projects. I'm working on actually an article on the Christology of Scotus, which I think will be quite interesting. That will be published next year, as well as a couple projects in the work of St. Bonaventure. So that's basically where my work is mostly. At some point, I would love to discuss Christology proper, de verbo incarnato, the metaphysics of the incarnation, because it's my opinion as it stands that on this question, the at least in a certain construal, Chalcedonian orthodoxy and Chalcedonian orthodoxy and Oriental orthodoxy don't need to have the kind of disagreement that is present, but it may be that my knowledge is incomplete. So I'd love to discuss that further at some point. So that's it.
Great. You will do that very soon for sure. Subdeacon, if you could give a quick plug, and we'll definitely set up a future show in the future.
Yeah, thank you, William. Thank you, Dr. Goff, for this. I appreciate it, and I would love to do that, Dr. Goff. There's a lot of meat we can put on the table and deal with for sure. Absolutely. That's exciting. I just want to plug my channel, Lion's Den. Look out for the episodes that are coming out soon. And there's a corresponding Discord channel and my Twitter account, just my name. And thank you again, William. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being on, both of you all. God bless you both. And we will be back very soon. What a great time to be able to talk about Christ, to be able to talk about the incarnation, and to talk about all of these great things. We will be back very soon. Everybody, leave a comment down below. Flood us with the comments for the algorithm. Let us know what you thought of the show. And I'll provide links to the Brothers channel and to Dr. Goff, Dear Brothers' work as well. Everybody, God bless you. God keep you. See you all soon.